The podcast you're about to hear is part of the Polish-Scottish Heritage Project, as one of its many productions which aim to promote a greater awareness of Poland and Scotland's shared heritage. We hope that it encourages you personally to look into the stories of the places, events and people that shape the history we are privileged to share.
In October 2013, we had the great pleasure of speaking to Zenon Śliwiński, a former tank driver in General Maczek's army who's lived in Glasgow since the war ended. Our conversation, fueled by some biscuits and some Polish vodka, lasted nearly 3 hours as we talked about his life in Glasgow, about how he met his Scottish wife and what he really missed about Poland. The most surprising thing was when we heard that this was exactly what a fortune teller predicted for him when he was just 11 years old.
And the gypsy woman came to the orchard and wanted to tell me my future. I was 11 or 12 years old and didn't like this idea. She held my hand and said, "You will live a long life." That got me interested. I wanted to know more. I wanted to be a pilot. I would see a small plane flying above. It must have been taking aerial photos. And I wanted to do this, to be a pilot. She said, "You will cross a lot of borders." I thought it made sense as I wanted to be a pilot. She said, "You will be very ill. You will have an accident." Again, I thought it was plausible as I wanted to be a pilot. But I didn't take it seriously. Then she said I would get better after the accident. Then she added, "You will get married." That made me pull my hand back. I didn't want to hear that. But she held it strongly and added, "You will marry a foreigner." I really didn't want to hear that. She says, "You will have children." And then she said I was going to be rich. When I think about it, it all came true. My friends told me I was telling tall stories. They weren't tall stories, it was the fact. Who would have thought? I crossed a lot of borders, I married a foreigner, I have a family. It's just those riches that I can't see.
What would you say was the Scottish people's initial attitude towards the Polish people who stayed here after the war?
They recognized that the Poles were hardworking. Everyone tried hard to impress their employer, and the employer started to recognize that.
And what about you and your professional life? How were you settling in those first years after the war?
I worked in a biscuit factory. My friends told me to join them and work at that factory as there was a lot of work there. I listened and went to work there. I ended up working there for 7 years. 7 years of night shift, only night shift. I thought it was impossible. So I started saving. Was saving £2 a week for 10 years. Until I saved 1,000. Enough to buy my own business. I ended up starting my own laundrette, where I employed 3 women. Those days, you had to take your laundry to the laundrette, not like today when you have a washing machine in every house. By having my own business, I was making twice as much as when I was working for somebody else. I hired 3 women to work in the laundrette, and I got myself a job at British Telecom.
So, taking your really busy professional life, how did you meet your wife?
Not at a dance, because my wife doesn't dance. She's got 2 left feet. But I don't dance either as I'm disabled. It was at a cafe. We got introduced by a Scottish friend. We had known each other for 3 or 4 years before we started dating properly, and my wife worked at the post office. So to speak to her, it was enough to buy a stamp. Those were the beginnings. Anyway, we then got married. She's a good woman, that she even dared to marry such a soldier. But love, as they say, doesn't choose, doesn't know any limits. As they say, you love so that you don't fall out of love. Get married. But it stayed like this until these days.
And what did your wife know about Poland when you first met? And what do you think her first impressions were of Polish men?
She knew nothing about Poland. I would invite her and her friends to a party or a dance, but she had to buy her own ticket, because I couldn't afford it. But she knew it. She knew that I only had £20 to live on. There was a Polish restaurant, where a friend of mine worked as a waiter. So, we would go there, order some dinner for myself, and the waiter would ask, "And for the lady?" And I'd say, "She's just passing by." And for myself, I would order stone soup and a cat. Yes, stone soup, and the cat was rabbit, the cheapest meat.
And what's the situation now? Does your wife understand much Polish?
She understands a lot. When I'm with my friends and we have some secrets, I always have to warn them. She understands.
And in final question, we wanted to simply know what it was about Scotland that Mr. Śliwiński liked the most. But the answer was really surprising.
What do I like? Well, the Scottish rainy days.
This project would not have been possible without the support of our sponsors, including the Consulate General of the Republic of Poland in Edinburgh, and the enthusiasm and hard work of our project volunteers, for which we are extremely grateful.